Hello guys, my name is Tayo. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to teach you how to use the SUMIF function and SUMIFs function in Microsoft Excel. Now the difference between the SUMIF and the SUMIFs is just having conditions. Now if you are going to use the SUMIF, it means you just have one condition to for your sum range. Now if you have two or more conditions, then that is when you use the SUMIF function, the SUMIFs function actually. So now look at this data. This is a sales record for a particular company, and they have three type of sellers. So I've extracted the names of the sellers here. Now if we need to calculate the sales of each sellers, that is one condition. So this is why we are going to use the SUMIF function here. Now if we need to calculate the sales by the days of the week, that is also a condition. So this is why we are going to use the SUMIF function for this one too. Now if you need to calculate the sales by month, then it is a condition as well, so we are going to use the SUMIF function. But in this case, we want to calculate the sales of a particular seller in a particular department. So this is the department in the sales record. So I've extracted the department here. So if you need to calculate the sales of a particular seller in a particular department, then you have two conditions. So this is when you use the SUMIFs function. Now without wasting much of our time, let's get to work. So we're going to calculate the sales of Kroger in this sales book. So like I said, it is a condition, so we are just going to use the SUMIF function. Now let's get started. If you need to calculate the sales, you start with your equal to sign, then you press this, you type the SUMIF. Now you see there is SUMIF, there is SUMIFs. Mind you, we are going to use SUMIF in this particular work. So when you type your SUMIF, you open your bracket, then you go to the range where you want your criteria to be found. Remember, the sellers are the criteria. So in this case, we want to know the total sales Kroger has in the entire sales record. This is our criteria. But in what range do you want this criteria to be found? So we want Excel to look for this criteria in this cell range, which is from cell A2 to the end. You can see we have lots of data here because the cell ends at 5,104. You have to agree with me that that is a lot. So going back, when you've highlighted the entire cells that you want Excel to look for, then that is your range. Then you type a comma, then you select your criteria. Now this is the criteria. You can decide to type your criteria in quotes. You can decide to type Kroger, which is perfectly okay, but it is preferable to have this criteria in a particular cell so that you can just reference to it when you want to apply to other cells. You get that later. So remember to just click this. Excel will pick this as Kroger actually. So when you pick this, you've selected your cell range, you selected the criteria, then you now select your sum range. So you're going to select the cell F. This is where we have our sales record. So you select cell F2 to the end. Sorry, not that. Yeah. So when you do that, you close the bracket. So what you've told Excel, the meaning of this formula now is that you've told Excel that go into cell A2 to A5104, which is the entire column where we have our sellers. Then look for Kroger. Wherever you see Kroger in this cell range, wherever you see Kroger, add the corresponding sales value in this particular cell range. So that is what Excel is going to do for you actually. So the moment you are okay with your formula, you press enter. Now what you see here is the total sales for Kroger in the entire sales period. So if you need to do this for TomTom and the third person, the beauty of it is that you don't have to type the formulas again. You can simply apply, so which is this. But there is a mistake. There is not really a mistake. There is a messed up in this formula. Before you apply, you have to make sure that certain references are in absolute format. For instance, we reference to cell A2 to A5104. Now this is called a relative cell reference. If you want your formula to be accurate, you have to put this in what we call absolute cell reference. So we are going to do that by putting the dollar sign. You can simply do that by pressing your F4 on your computer, which is this. Then you put the dollar sign here too. But for Kroger, we want the cell to change depending on where the formula is. So we are going to leave this one in a relative format. Then we want our sales region to remain. So we're going to put the dollar sign as well. So then it is perfect now. So you can easily apply. Then you have a correct testing. So if you want to know if what you did here is right, just have to click the formula and see that in this particular formula, we've told Excel to go into the cell A2 to A5104 and look for TomTom, then add the corresponding sales value. Same thing goes for the third one. So that is pretty much it on sales by sellers. So without cracking your brain, without going through having to press calculator, imagine the numbers of time you would have to press your calculators if you were to calculate this manually. So we have that's how to do it by that's Excel's way of doing it. Now let's do the calculation. Let's get the sales for each of the days in the week. So what we did here is practically what we are going to do here. The only change is the condition we used for this calculation. In this case, we are not going to use the seller again, so we are just going to use the days. So instead of referencing to cell A2 to A5104, we are going to reference to cell C2 to C5104. I hope you get that. So let's start by typing an equal to sign, then the sum if. Remember, this is sum if because we have one condition. So you open your bracket, then you go to the cell range first, where you want Excel to look for your criteria, which is the C2 to C5104. Now I can just start putting my absolute cell reference from the start without having to do that after I type the whole formula. So then I'm going to put it here to F4. So we've told Excel to go into cell C2 to cell C5104. Then look for what? Look for Monday. So wherever Excel sees Monday in this selected cell range, Excel will add the corresponding values. So we selected Monday. We are going to leave Monday in a relative cell reference because when we apply this formula to Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we want this thing to change from J3 to J4. So we are going to leave it in a relative cell reference. This, because of the dollar sign, is absolute cell reference, but the J3 without a dollar sign is called relative cell reference. It means it is going to change relatively to the cell that the formula is applied to. So when you select your criteria, you put your comma, and then you come to your sum range. Remember, our sum range has to be in absolute cell reference 2. So from F2 to F1000 5104. So we are going to put that in absolute cell reference 2. Yes. So we are good. Yeah. So without wasting much of the time, you can just apply the formula down here, and that's it. So in a simple in less than a minute, you've gotten your sales for the total sales for Monday, the total sales for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So you can see how easy this can be. So if you want this thing to be in the same format, you can have it in 2 decimal point or 1. So I think 2 is okay. So what we've done here in the sales by sellers and sales by day is exactly the same thing we do in sales by month. So if you are to calculate this sales by month, you are just going to repeat what we did here, but now the only change is that your criteria or your condition is no more Monday nor Kroger. It is by month, which is January. So instead of referencing to cell C or cell column A or column C, you're going to reference to column D. I hope you get that. So let's get to work. So if you want to get the sales by month, you type your equal to sign, then sum if. Remember, it's sum if because we have one condition. So you go to your range where you have your month, which is cell D2 to D5104. Remember, this cell range has to be in absolute cell reference. Don't forget, it has to be because we want the cell to remain. In case we apply this formula to February, March, and the rest, we want this cell range to remain. Otherwise, the moment we apply, Excel will start for February. Excel will pick it from cell D3 to D5105, and for March, Excel will pick D4 to 5106. That is the difference between absolute cell reference and relative cell reference. So if you want the cell range to remain, you have to include the dollar sign. So you can do that by just pressing putting your cursor behind the cell name, then you press your F4. So you are telling Excel to go to cell D2 to D5104 and look for what condition? Look for January. Remember, I told you you can easily type January instead of selecting, but it has to be in quote. But the beauty of selecting is that the moment you want to apply the formula, you would have to change January to February. You have to edit each of the formulas and change January to February, then edit March, change it to March, like that. So instead of going through that stress, have your months or your conditions typed out, then click the cell, but leave it in a relative cell reference so that it will change according to the cells. So we are not going to put this, the condition has to be in a relative cell reference, because when we apply, we want this cell to change to L4, where we have a new condition, which is February. So when you selected your range and the criteria or the condition, then you press your comma again. Now you can select your cell range, the sum range rather. So the sum range is from F2 to F1104. Remember, this has to be in absolute cell reference 2. So going to F4, then we are done. So that's just it. It's pretty much that simple. Then you can just apply your formula down. Yeah, so we don't have sales. Mere looking at this, you can tell we don't have sales in September, October, November, and December. It means our sales stopped here. So we can have this in 2 decimal places. Now that is just it on sum if. You can do your sum. You can do your sum if by departments. You can do your sum if by any conditions you like. So that is it. If you decide to have quarter year quarter, Q1, Q2, Q3, and Q4, you can use the sum if function to determine the sales by each quarter of the year. So that is that on sum if. Now let's move to sum ifs. Remember, I told you that sum ifs is used when you have two criteria or two conditions. So in this case, we have two conditions. We want to know the total sales for this particular seller. Remember, we have the total sales for this particular seller, but we want to have the total sales for this particular seller in a particular department. You see, we have different departments. So we want to, if you go through the entire data, you realize there are different departments. We have the bakery, we have produce, we have dairy products, we have seasonal goods. So we want to know what this guy sold in a particular department, say the bakery, the produce, dairy, butcher, dry goods, seasonal goods, or frozen goods. So this is a new function entirely. It is different from the sum if. This is called sum ifs, and it is sum ifs because the condition is no more 1, it is now 2. If you have 3 conditions, 4, 5, 6, you can use the sum ifs, but in this case we have 2 conditions. So you're just going to come here, now press your equal to sign, then type sum ifs now, not sum if. Remember, this is sum ifs. Then you open your bracket. Now the difference between this and the sum if is that in the sum if we selected our criteria range first, but in this case you are going to select your sum range first. So you are going to select where you want z to sum the values, which is from F2 to F5104. Remember that. Then you can now select a cell for your criteria, which is so the first criteria is this, the seller. So you're going to go to where you have the seller, which is A2 to A 5,104. Remember that is the end of our sales record there. Then when you highlighted the cell range, then the criteria you want to pick here is Kroger. Remember I told you you can always type. In this case it is okay to type, so I'm going to type Kroger. Then you can put your comma. Then you go to the next criteria we want is the department, so you can go ahead and select your department as well, cell E2 to E5104. Then what do you want there to pick here? The condition. The second condition is the department name, which is Bosher. Remember I can decide to type Bosher as well, but in this case I'll just choose anyone you go with is okay. But in a situation where you have your conditions written out like this, it's always preferable to select. So having done that, I'm going to close, then press enter. Now this is the total sales for Kroger in this particular department. Remember this is his total sales in the entire period, regardless of in all department. This was his total sales. Now in a particular department, this is his total sales. Now we are going to apply this formula to the rest. So if you need to get his sales in other departments, you just have to apply the formula. But remember, before applying the formula, there are certain references that has to be absolute, like our sum range. It has to be absolute, remember that. So you do that by pressing F4. Sorry, that was F5. So you do that by pressing F4. Then your criteria range 1, you don't want it to change, press your F4. Now remember this Kroger, this is not a cell reference because we've typed it in quote. Remember, if you are typing, it has to be in quote, so there is no need to reference this. This is not an absolute cell reference, nor it is a relative cell reference. So you just ignore that. Then you come to your criteria 2, then you put it in an absolute cell reference format. Then you are going to leave these because these are condition 2 and we want it to change as it goes to the next cell. So now we can just apply as follow. Yeah, so this is pretty much the whole thing. If you want to be certain if we've done the right thing, you can just decide to sum these all figures and see if it will give you this figure. So let's do that by, I hope you all know how to do your summing. The fastest way actually is highlighting the entire range and press your auto sum here, which is this. Now let's have these in two decimal places as well. So if you check it, see the same figure here is the same figure here. It means our work is correct. So what we have here is Kroger sales in the entire period, but what we did here is Kroger sales in different departments, in which eventually the total sales is still going to be the same with this. So I hope with this you learn first the difference between the sum if and the sum ifs function, and I hope in case where you have a condition, you can use your sum if to calculate a total sales or a total score or a total COVID-19 cases or anything. You can use this sum if in range of things. Then in case you have two conditions or more, actually you can use the sum ifs if you have more than two conditions. If you have 3, 4, 5, 6, you can use it. Say you want to calculate Kroger sales in this department, but you want it on Mondays only. You want to know what this guy sells on Monday in this particular department. Now that is three conditions. You use your sum ifs as well. So that is it on sum ifs and sum ifs. If you enjoyed this video, if you feel this video has impacted you in any way, please show a love by subscribing. Thank you very much.